kick. Well, not really. I mean, unless you say, well, you've been on it for the last 30 years, Emil, right? No, but since I did this interview on the PETA podcast, which you can get wherever you get your podcasts, this is the live Emil Amok's Takeout, which we do for no particular audience. In fact, that's what people say. Oh, you're doing it for no audience at all. Well, yeah, we're doing it live because when you're live, it's just sort of there's more danger. Live on @Emil Amok on Twitter, fb.com/EmilGuillermo.media, youtube.com/Emil Amok1. Actually, that's where we do this show. It's live, and we talk about the news of the day. It's the micro talk show of the AAPI and the AAXs, Asian American X, fill in your ethnicity. Although you don't have to be an AA, you can be anything. And I talk about the news, and so I was thinking about what Wayne Chung, who is the co-founder of Direct Action, what he was saying on the PETA podcast. And he was talking about this idea, and we talked about it yesterday, this idea of when it's necessary to break the law. Because comparatively speaking, there's a greater need to break the law than to preserve the law that is more evil. That is, in his case, he had to save the life of 2 piglets who were dying. And then he was prosecuted for property, for theft of property. And his defense was that was a necessary evil to thwart the real evil, which was factory farming. That was his defense. We talked about it yesterday. And then oddly, or maybe not so oddly, what it is really an act of civil disobedience, right? And so last night on The Last Word, Lawrence O'Donnell show, he's talking about the letter from Birmingham, Martin Luther King's letter, talking about just that, civil disobedience. And it's quite a letter. It's an historical piece. He wrote it from jail about why it was necessary for him to commit an act of civil disobedience. And it's something that Wikipedia, look at it. It's something that Justin Pearson and Justin Jones have talked about, because they are really, the media is making them into the second coming of MLK, the 2 of them, which is a good thing because they are an example of what happens when you stand up, you expose the ridiculousness of the system. Just look at what happened today. Justin Pearson, after being reinstated by his local officials in Memphis, he got reinstated today to the same job that the State House kicked him out last week. And so now the 2 of the 3 Tennessee 3, Justin Pearson today, Justin Jones on Monday, have now been reinstated. Exactly the way we called it last week, that how ridiculous the conservatives, the theocrats of the state legislature were to expel Justin Jones and Justin Pearson, throw them out of their jobs, and now a week later they're back in. Which should tell you something about just how crazed and how stupid politicians can get. I'm talking about the Republicans in the state house of Tennessee, how they get when we are in just the heat of divided government. All they want to do is take out the opposition, shut down, silence the opposition. It was anti-democratic. There was a means for these two legislators to get back, and they have, and it exposes the Tennessee legislators of the GOP who perpetrated this as the obstructionists that they are. Anyway, it's worth noting, especially today when Justin Pearson gets reinstated. Like I said, the second of the two who were expelled last week. Justin Jones, we wrote about Justin Jones. Go to my ALDEF blog, aaldef.org/black. I'm being careful not to say the two black legislators because, as I point out in my article, my column, Justin Jones is African American and Asian American Filipino. And I think it's important to note that this is a multiracial, a multi-generational movement, a multiracial, multi-generational pro-democracy movement. You see it, and it's essentially starting in Tennessee. That's where all the media's attention is. And that's how you should take the reinstatement of Justin Pearson today and Justin Jones on Monday, that it is sparking. People are seeing that we can defeat these anti-democratic moves of the GOP to try to silence the opposition, that there is a strategy, there's a way to get to justice. Those two guys, Justin Pearson and Justin Jones, are now the symbols. And I think you're going to start seeing this spread. Now, we feared that we would see the spread of red state supermajorities come on and pull these kind of stunts, expel, shut down the opposition because they could. But I think what's happening is this backfiring of that strategy, because I think you're going to see the people expelled, or the people on the other side, the vocal minorities who stand up. I think you're going to start seeing more of them empowered by really the coincidence of all this happening during Holy Week. We're going to see people witness this political resurrection, and it's really the beginning of a movement. But I just wanted to alert you to the letter from Birmingham jail that Martin Luther King read, that they brought up last night in a discussion on MSNBC. And it's important because that is really how you defeat tyranny in a democracy: civil disobedience. And as I saw that last night, it just harkened back to my interview on the PETA podcast this week that I released. My interview with Wayne Chung, Direct Action Everywhere, DXE, who faced, I think it was 10 years. It was a very significant amount of time. Faced prosecution for the theft of 2 piglets from a factory farm because, as he pointed out, these piglets were they were dying. It was an act of compassion. And he put it, the doctrine of necessary evil, that the crime of theft, which in fact was saving these 2 piglets, was more important than, or less of a crime than the crime of factory farming in America. So you see, it's all related. Civil rights, animal rights, civil disobedience. It's all related. Anyway, welcome to our program, Emil Muck's Takeout. I want lots happening today, but I wanted to begin with that since we talked about Justin Jones and Justin Pearson yesterday, and that's going to continue to be a theme because they are a thing now. The media is making them a thing as examples of how to fight back and thwart fascist urges by supermajorities like the Republicans in the Tennessee State House. And I hope people learn that lesson and then take the lesson of the Birmingham letter to heart, because civil disobedience is a way to fight tyranny in a democracy. Peacefully. So that's the first story we take care of. I also want to talk about Dianne Feinstein. I have talked about Dianne Feinstein for, at least, the better part of a year, ever since stories broke about, maybe she's not fully functional as a senator. She's come out and said, yes, I can do my job. And then later on, she came back and said, all right, she's going to fill out her term, but she's not going to resign. So we'll talk about the latest on the Dianne Feinstein story. I want to talk about the Bob Lee story. There was an arrest made in the East Bay city of Emeryville. A suspect, someone who police say knew Bob Lee. Bob Lee was the tech guy who was behind one of the founders of Cash App. And it's a San Francisco crime story, but as most stories out of San Francisco, when something happens in San Francisco, the nation takes particular glee because it supposedly exposes a kind of hypocrisy or a kind of, a malfunction of the woke or of the left, or, something's wrong with San Francisco. Look at the high crime. That was a narrative being spread with the Bob Lee murder. And so now it's become a national story. And of course, the New York Times, right on top of this, they're not normally on top of these kind of local crimes. Although Bob Lee, as the Cash App founder, big tech guy, deserved some coverage, but it more deserved coverage because of what San Francisco is a symbol of. San Francisco is a symbol of, it's a great city, right? Not lately. I mean, that's been the change in narrative. Oh, what's wrong with San Francisco? Is, the liberals got it wrong. The liberals can't govern. There's too much crime. That's the issue. If the liberals can't control the crime, they got a bad DA, they got a bad mayor, they got a bad police chief. What's wrong with San Francisco? That was the underlying narrative. And so the New York Times, of course, reported. I'll read from that story and give you my thoughts about what I think is going on or what could happen with the Bob Lee story. I mean, there's no glee. I mean, they caught somebody, or they have arrested somebody, and they'll be arraigned tomorrow, but still a long way to go in terms of figuring out, what does this really mean? All right, so we'll get to that. And then one other story I want to talk about today, because it just broke, and people may not have seen it. They may have buried Clarence Thomas on the initial ProPublica story that he has taken gifts, like maybe up to $500,000 or actually more. I mean, private jets, luxury yachts. Harlan Crow, the billionaire in Dallas, his benefactor, Clarence Thomas, the freeloader. Man, this is worse than affirmative action. This is worse than, an unqualified person getting some kind of largesse. But Clarence Thomas, there's another thing that dropped today by ProPublica, and I'll get to that in a second. But let me just start off with Dianne Feinstein. First of all, you must know that I have known Dianne Feinstein since I was a 16-year-old boy. growing up in San Francisco. And in fact, one of the first columns I ever did for the Lowell High School newspaper was my column on seeing Dianne Feinstein speak and getting in to see the pornographic movie Deep Throat on the same week, and how that impacted me. It was a satire. Dianne Feinstein, she was a supervisor at the time. She climbed her way up, up the ladder in San Francisco machine politics, from supervisor to mayor to senator, Democrat. And so I've known her a long time. For 16, I first engaged with her, and then later on, when I was a San Francisco television reporter, I was invited back to Lowell High School to give a speech on graduation day, and wouldn't you know, so I shared a stage with Dianne Feinstein. So we know each other, but here's the sad thing: if you were to ask her today about, hey, do you know Emil Guillermo? She'd probably say, Emil who? That's because not just the passing of time, but some people say her ability to function and recall and not quite where it's been. Now, I only say this to show that I've had some dealings with her, and I actually have a soft spot in my heart for her as a San Franciscan. So maybe I'm a little too willing to see her play out her role, to take it to term and then leave. But as I said when she first announced that a few months ago, I said, well, this then upends Gavin Newsom's promise to appoint a black female to the Senate. And which black female in California might that be? Everyone was pointing to Barbara Lee, Representative Barbara Lee of Oakland, who I would support. And I like Barbara Lee of Oakland. But maybe some people were saying this was Feinstein's attempt to make sure her person gets the job. And her person is Adam Schiff. Adam Schiff, who, Mr. Impeachment, good guy, can raise a lot of money. And then there was another person who wants the job, Katie Porter, out of LA, out of Southern California. She's raised a lot of money. So already we've got a crowded field. Barbara Lee has announced, so has Porter, Schiff. There are 3 Democrats. One more, Lee, most progressive. Schiff, Porter. Porter's more, she's progressive, but she doesn't have the experience of Barbara Lee. And then Schiff, she's a very popular Democrat. But by taking her office to term, Feinstein she can control who her successor is. And that's probably why she's trying to hang in there. So I kind of was hoping that Gavin Newsom would get a chance to appoint Barbara Lee, but now things are a little bit uncertain. And then they were more uncertain when Feinstein got the shingles, or has had the shingles the last month, and is still recovering. Shingles, terrible thing. It looks like little pussy pimples on your skin. It's terrible, and it's painful. So she hasn't been able to do her job. In the meantime, there's been a kind of backlog for judicial appointments. because Dianne Feinstein can't serve on the Judiciary Committee. And so she's asked Senator Schumer to make a temporary replacement so that those appointments can go through. I don't know if that's going to happen. I'm pretty sure there's going to be some people blocking there's going to be some horse trading between Democrats and Republicans to block that, to force Dianne Feinstein's hand. And who comes out as the real culprit in all this? Who is put this on the agenda even? Not Feinstein. The person who's put this on the agenda is South Asian American representative from Silicon Valley, Khanna, who on this very day that he becomes the face of, I respect Dianne Feinstein, but she really should go. He's the face of that. Khanna's the face of that. But on this day, he also gets a big mention in Jennifer Rubin's column in the Washington Post, where there's Khanna as this high-tech guy from Silicon Valley trying to bring tech to the rural areas of America. To me, it all smacks of a kind of orchestrated thing where Khanna gets a little payback for being the progressive, the reasonable progressive, saying, hey, I know all about loyalty, but, if Dianne Feinstein can't do the job, then she must go. That's essentially a paraphrase of what Khanna has said. Khanna always trying to seem high-minded, but this is his power play. Make no mistake, it's his power play. And it's unfortunate that we happen to agree on who should be Dianne Feinstein's replacement, Barbara Lee. But I just don't like the way he's doing it, because it harkens back to the ambitions of Khanna from the very beginning, as a guy who tried to upend Congressman Mike Honda, the longtime representative of Silicon Valley, friend of a former boss of mine, Norman Y. Mineta, Asian American stalwart Democrat, ranking high up in the party during the late 90s, during the Obama years. And here was Khanna, who just let his ambition show a little too much. He ran against Honda a couple of times and lost, I believe. But I guess third time's the charm, right? I mean, he ran and lost and ran and lost and ran and won. And I just think that kind of ambition just shows the true nature of the guy. Ambitious as hell. And it's the reason why you only show your love for politicians only so much, because their true nature will disappoint you. And I was always of the position that, look, Honda's not going to be there forever. Honda's not going to, Honda would still be there were it not for an upstart like Khanna. But everyone was impatient. This also harkens back to other races in Hawaii. The Senator Dan Akaka race, when Chase was at Ed Case was after Akaka's race, or after Akaka's office. Case didn't win, ultimately got into the House again, but this is what happens when there's a bottleneck of power. That's what we're talking about. A bottleneck of power. And I guess someone told Ro Khanna, now's the time. Now's the time. You won't look as bad. You won't look half as bad as you really are if you go after Dianne Feinstein now. He's getting a lot of play. And he's getting a lot of play. Washington Post this morning, Jennifer Rubin's column. He got some play on all the, the newspapers like The Hill. And he was on, I believe he's on CNN this morning. He is the face of the Dump Feinstein movement. And I just think it's a little kind of classless, really. And yet, because it's party against party, right? Democrats against Democrats. And more specifically, progressives against more moderates. But if they let this, really, it's ageism. If they let this ageism go, I think it spells trouble for Biden. Biden, who is, Biden is 80. Feinstein's 89. Biden wants to run again. And, Biden at 80 is still functional. I mean, he's in Ireland. Feinstein, has had some health issues, but as Nancy Pelosi, 83-year-old Nancy Pelosi pointed out, people didn't go after Fetterman, who checked himself into a hospital and, excused himself for medical reasons. No one went after Fetterman saying he must go. No one goes after, as Pelosi said, no one goes after men. So Pelosi knows how to handle this. It's really a matter of sexism. But I think the bigger, broader issue is a matter of ageism. And there he is. Someone, an ageist, is calling me up saying, no, you're wrong, Emil. I'm sorry. I just think that Dianne Feinstein deserves to go out the way she wants. She shouldn't be forced. She shouldn't be prompted. She should go out the way she wants. And even though I like Barbara Lee and I want Gavin Newsom to appoint Barbara Lee says she's going to run. Let the voters decide who is the best candidate to replace her ultimately in an open primary. And it'll be crowded and people will be able to debate and choose between Lee, Schiff, Katie Porter, and whoever goes out there. But someone told Ro Khanna that if you're going to be an ass, be it now, and no one will remember because we just need someone to be the face of the Dump Feinstein movement, and he has obliged, which is too bad. I was starting to like his progressive politics, but this is the thing, as I said about politicians, they're still politicians, even the ones you like a little bit, and they have their frailties. I hope Feinstein recovers from the shingles. I hope she can travel and do her job again. I know that she has issues, but I think for someone who's been such a long-standing public servant, she deserves to go out on her own and not get pushed out by young, ambitious upstarts who are too impatient to wait their turn. I don't know. After seeing how Ro Khanna talks about Feinstein, can you trust him? That would be my question. Can you trust the guy? Oh, he's talking for the people. Yeah. No one. would have known that Dianne Feinstein had shingles until someone said, let's push her out. Khanna did that. No one would have known or it made this a story today until Khanna said, hey, I'm a Democrat. Let's push out the other Democrat. Khanna overstepped. He should pay. All right, the other story that broke within the last couple hours is this Bob Lee story. Bob Lee was the tech founder of Cash App. The headline in the New York Times, tech consultant arrested in San Francisco killing of Cash App creator. The police said the consultant, Nima Momeni, was an acquaintance of Bob Lee. And they show a picture of the Rincon Hill area of San Francisco, one of my favorite areas. I mean, people don't know San Francisco like I do as a native. Rincon Hill was this godforsaken place that no one cared about because it had freeways and it was kind of like a Skid Row kind of place. They tore down the freeways and then the land became valuable. And they started building up buildings and apartments and high rises. And they built the ballpark. And now it's like one of the most desirable sections of San Francisco. There are parts of San Francisco that I don't even know because they were kept under wraps when I was growing up as a boy here in San Francisco. Under this freeway, no one saw it. It was like a place that no one went to. You know, the places down by the ballpark, the place down by Oracle now, Dog Patch, all those places, they were just like hidden. And now they're discovered. New generation. So in a way, it's kind of good for San Francisco, but in a way, the whole city, it's enabled the whole city to be gentrified. It's enabled the whole city to be reborn and not in a way that is necessarily flattering. It's become a whole lot more like Manhattan. And there was a big push when I was growing up to stop or end the Manhattanization of San Francisco. It failed, just outright failed. But there was a real push by, would you call them hippies? They were, counterculture, not really counterculture types, just, leftists, progressives who said, no, we don't want these tall canyon type buildings. We don't want Manhattanization. We don't need a skyline in San Francisco. So anyway, that was the 60s, late 60s. And now here we have Rincon Hill. It's developed. This is where Bob Lee lived. South of Market, actually sort of like the tonier area south of Market Street. And so the story, when I think of the Bob Lee story, I think of that. I think of the gentrification of San Francisco, but I also think of this other narrative that spread throughout the country, that San Francisco is unsafe, that the liberals have blown it. Oh, and this relates to Feinstein because she was part of the machine that created this San Francisco. I mean, unfortunately, that's sort of the truth. While Feinstein, the Burton machine, but under Feinstein, this is where under her administration, this is when all the big buildings went up. And then bigger buildings came up subsequently. Because that was the beginning, really, of the Manhattanization. So, it's part of my whole love-hate with Feinstein. So, Bob Lee's killing was, impacted the tech community, impacted people, both who are part of the new San Francisco and then also it was a narrative that was used by people on the East Coast to say, hey, look, San Francisco isn't the city that knows how. It doesn't have it together. Look at the crime. The city's falling apart. Right? So it was a big deal when the mayor, London Breed, and the police chief and the district attorney, the leaders of San Francisco went out there today in a news conference and said, Nima Momeni, 38, a tech consultant who knew Mr. Lee was being held, is going to be charged on California Penal Code 187. That's the murder statute. And I'm thinking, this good, but let me read on. This is the New York Times story. In surveillance footage from the night of the killing, Mr. Lee can be seen staggering and clutching his side near a car on a darkened street around 2:30 a.m. on April 4th in a neighborhood of high-rise condominiums. The owner of an enterprise tech business in the East Bay city of Emeryville, which is an odd way of phrasing Emeryville, California. The East Bay city of Emeryville. Oh, you mean the city next to Oakland? Yeah. Mr. Momeni was apprehended there after an intense investigation in which the authorities had warned from the outset that Mr. Lee may have been killed by someone he knew and not in a random street crime. Mr. Momeni was booked on Thursday morning at the San Francisco County Jail on a murder charge, according to jail records. That development on Thursday undermined a growing narrative that the killing reflected a city where the professional class was being threatened by random attacks and a flawed approach to criminal justice. That's one narrative, right? The professional class was being threatened. But there was a broader narrative that doesn't include the professional classes being attacked, but just that there's a lawlessness in the city. So in a way, you see how high up in the story here in the New York Times, just to remind, it's almost like the tourism board wrote that. Scott Wiener, a Democratic state senator who represents the city, said the rush to judgment by tech luminaries such as Elon Musk and colleagues of Mr. Lee, a well-known figure in Silicon Valley, had managed to be both inaccurate and damaging to San Francisco, which has been struggling to rebound from the coronavirus pandemic. This is the danger of making one crime into a symbol, Mr. Wiener said. This was a horrific, brutal murder, and I'm so grateful that the police solved it so quickly. And San Francisco does have real public safety problems, but this particular crime does not appear to have anything to do with them. See, I wouldn't get that happy, Scott Wiener. It's a crime. But he's right. One crime doesn't it established a narrative, but it doesn't prove the narrative to be true. It was a handy generalization for people who want to put down San Francisco. And in that sense, I'm glad they got the culprit, the alleged culprit. So back to the New York Times story. Talks about how the narrative persisted even as word spread of the arrest on Thursday. Jason Calacanis, a tech investor and entrepreneur, tweeted that everyone has said we don't know the details of any individual case. At the same time, anyone who walks a couple of blocks in San Francisco outside of Pac White's, where things seem to be oddly safe, knows how dangerous the city is. And the story makes reference to this slang, Pac Whites, meaning the affluent Pacific Heights neighborhood. I will say this. I went to the city. I go to the city a lot more since I've got out of my closet and have been unmasked and go to places like my favorite restaurants, favorite vegan restaurant there. The city's weird. There are pockets of the city where you can feel very safe, but pockets where you just feel like totally like, what's going on here? And of course, I wasn't in Pac Whites. I drove by Pac Whites. I was in the marina, which might as well be lower Pac Whites. In fact, that's one term for it. But totally safe there. And isn't it funny? mostly white, even where I was. Not, and I just want to throw this out there because I have been in New York City for the last, couple months. And, I felt safer in New York City than I did or than I have in San Francisco. Isn't that funny? I mean, and I went all over East Town, East Side, West Side, all around the town, right? But I was living in a gentrified section of New York, what was once known as, Alphabet City. This is terrible. Safe, gentrified. Never felt endangered at all. And yet, in San Francisco, a number of times in, the last year or so, especially in a theater that I go to in San Francisco, where the homeless problem is really, it's bad. I mean, just this week, a number of stories about the 8th and Market Street area, how they closed the Whole Foods, which is the mark of, affluence of a neighborhood. You got a Whole Foods there. Great, but the Whole Foods has to close down because they've had too many thefts. They fear for their employees. In San Francisco, and 8th and Market, that's where I worked in a studio at one point in my career. And I was beginning to see things even back then, 15, 20 years ago. And it's only worse. Believe me, I know every stretch of Market Street from growing up as a young kid. And it's different now. And, every time you go back home, they always say, it's not the same, Emil. It's not the same. So I kind of buy the narrative that there's something going on in San Francisco. I don't know what it is, but I think some of it is the homeless issue not being dealt with. Some of it is the streets they're like the havens for people to be let out from, mental institutions. And, it's sad. I don't know what the answers are. Aside from making sure if someone panhandles, I give them a card saying, here's where you can get some resources. They'll take it, they'll rip it out. In some ways it's better to, here's some money. Then I'm contributing to the problem. I don't know what it is. But San Francisco has an image problem, and this arrest isn't going to solve anything, unfortunately. And get this. Nemo Momeni, 38, tech consultant, who apparently knew Mr. Lee. No one knows if there are any witnesses. The California law is 187. California Penal Code 187. And there is a version of stand your ground that exists in California, where I don't know what Momeni is going to say. I don't know what his narrative or story is, but this is speculation. Maybe there was a disagreement. Maybe there was some kind of tussle. Could Nemo Momeni claim some kind of self-defense? I don't know. But this is far from, this is not a slam dunk case for the DA's office. And surely the word's going to spread throughout the nation that, an arrest was made. But I don't know if it's going to change the perception. Because, there are going to be people saying, hey, the liberals have screwed up. The liberals can't control crime. I mean, there are already stories about California law, or there's a threshold by which they don't prosecute. So the bad guys are smart. They only steal up to the threshold, and then no one bothers to prosecute. Small businesses say, hey, how do we stay in business? We got partners, the bad guys, and the cops don't do anything. So I don't know. I don't know about my hometown, San Francisco, but this news about a suspect in the murder of Bob Lee is not necessarily the good news that everyone might think at first. We'll have to see. The guy who was arrested, consultant Nemo Momeni, if he's a successful consultant, he'll have a decent lawyer. And we will have an argument on our hands. You can rest assured. All right, one last story. I want to bring this up because we talked about the ProPublica pieces on Clarence Thomas, how Clarence Thomas is, beneficiary of hundreds of millions of dollars from Harlan Crow, billionaire. Well, a second story broke today on ProPublica. Headline, billionaire Harlan Crow bought property from Clarence Thomas. The justice didn't disclose the deal. Oh my God. He's not just a friend. He bought property from Clarence Thomas. This is the coin of the realm for Harlan Crow. He is a property and development and real estate guy. You go to Dallas. I worked in Dallas for a couple of years. Trammell Crow, same family. Harlan Crow, it's all about real estate, the land. I'm just going to read for the key graphs here. The transaction is the first known instance of money flowing from Crow to the Supreme Court justice. The sale netted the GOP megadonor 2 vacant lots and the house where Thomas's mother was living. So, God, nice guy. Thomas sold out his mom. Here's the lead graph. In 2014, one of Texas billionaire Harlan Crow's companies purchased a string of properties on a quiet residential street in Savannah, Georgia. It wasn't a marquee acquisition for the real estate magnate, just an old single-story home and 2 vacant lots down the road. What made it noteworthy were the people on the other side of the deal. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas and his relatives. The transaction marks the first known instance of money flowing from the Republican megadonor to the Supreme Court Justice. The Crow Company bought the properties for $133,363 from 3 owners. That's it, $133,000. Doesn't sound significant unless someone wanted to unload, right, these properties. And then here's Crow. I usually deal in Dallas and Texas, but you're in Georgia. Here's $133,000. Thomas, his mother, and the family of Thomas's late brother, according to a state tax document in a deed dated October 15th, 2014, filed at the Chatham County Courthouse. So, $133,363. It sounds like maybe Crow got a sweetheart deal. He felt compelled to give Clarence Thomas hundreds of thousands of dollars in lavish gifts and jet plane rides and cruises and all that. Luxury vacations. Hey, I took him so badly in that real estate deal, maybe I better give him some other perks here. I mean, he is Supreme Court Justice. I mean, got to keep him happy. The purchase put Crow in an unusual position. He now owned the house where the justice's elderly mother was living, Soon after the sale was completed, contractors began work on tens of thousands of dollars of improvements on the 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom home, which looks out onto a patch of orange trees. The renovations included a carport, a repaired roof, a new fence and gates, according to city permit records and blueprints. Oh, so he sold the house, but he just wanted Crow to fix his mom's home. You know, you could call a handyman and have that done. All right, here's the guts of the story, though. A federal disclosure law passed after Watergate requires justices and other officials to disclose the details of most real estate sales over $1,000. Thomas never disclosed his sale of the Savannah properties. This appears to be a violation of the law, 4 ethics law experts told ProPublica. See, you know, this is the cool thing about journalism. You're not the prosecutor, but you just need to gather the evidence, and you don't get to say things in the story. You let opinion guys like myself do reported opinion and say, hey, this sounds like a violation of the law. And then you include in your story what these 4 ethics law experts told ProPublica. The disclosure form Thomas filed for that year also had space to report the identity of the buyer in any private transaction, such as a real estate deal. That space is blank. In other words, what is Thomas hiding? Or clearly he was hiding something. Quote, he needed to report his interest in the sale, said Virginia Cantor, a former government ethics lawyer now at the watchdog group Crew. Given the role Crow has played in subsidizing the lifestyle of Thomas and his wife, you have to wonder if this was an effort to put cash in their pockets. Now, this is journalistic. Ask Thomas about the story. And ProPublica reports Thomas did not respond to detailed questions for this story. In a statement, Crow said he purchased Thomas's mother's house where Thomas spent part of his childhood to preserve it for posterity. Oh, sure, probably, and to preserve his friendship with a member of the Supreme Court. Quote, my intention is to one day create a public museum at the Thomas home dedicated to telling the story of our nation's second black Supreme Court justice, he said. Oh, well, that clearly is some kind of conflict. He wants to start a museum, create a public museum, give Thomas some money first. I mean, there was no other legal public way to do it that was more up and up than to buy it outright from Thomas. Quote, I approached the Thomas family about my desire to maintain his historic site so future generations could learn about the inspiring life of one of our greatest Americans, who also happens to be one of the most corrupt Supreme Court justices that we've ever seen in modern times. Crow's statement did not directly address why he also bought 2 vacant lots from Thomas down the street, but he wrote that, quote, the other lots were later sold to a vetted builder who was committed to improving the quality of the neighborhood and preserving its historical integrity. Never mind ethics and integrity on all of the scores. And that was just one expert who questioned the deal. Another one, a legal ethics expert at WashU in St. Louis, said, sounded like Thomas was hiding a financial relationship with Crow. And I think that's what you need to know, that the Supreme Court justice, if he's wearing an extra large robe, who knows what's underneath that robe? It could be Harlan Crow hiding. But it's certainly not ethical, and it's corrupt. All right, so that's it for today. So a lot today, Dianne Feinstein. We talked about Bob Lee. I think Feinstein should go on her own. On her own accord. Unless she really can't do the job. And if she can't, then let the campaigning begin, right? And then it'll be, well, if Newsom holds true to his word and puts up Barbara Lee, she'll be the incumbent. Huge advantage. So maybe that's what Khanna intended to do when he mentioned Feinstein. But I just know that it's just a crummy way to force anyone's hand in politics. All right, the Bob Lee story we talked about. Let's see what happens. The suspect will get an attorney, be arraigned tomorrow. Who knows what his story is going to be, the suspect. But I don't think this will solve the image problem San Francisco has of it failing as a city. And then we just talked about Clarence Thomas. Just more on top of last week's information about being accepting and not disclosing money from Harlan Crow. Now there's more. Harlan Crow actually purchased property that Clarence Thomas owned, including the house of his mother. Anyway. All right. Hey, thank you for tuning in. I'm Emil Guillermo. These are my takes on all things considerable. Emil Amok's Takeout. Heard only here on, I put it on YouTube. I put it on Twitter at Emil Amok. I put it on Facebook at fb.com/EmilGuillermo.media, also my Facebook page. And I put it on amok.com. So if you don't get it live in any of those places, catch the recordings. Regular listeners know, hey, this is show 501, just like the jeans. 501. Oh, those are the button ones. I like zippers. Regular listeners know that I like to say a little meditation as we exit, and it always boils down to loving kindness. And so, as I wish for me, I wish for you. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. And may you live with ease. Simple. Hey, till next time. Emil Guillermo here. amok.com. Catch it there. Back again tomorrow. Until then, mahal